you know, I do actually get a little bit more calm when I've got a little alcohol because I don't drink it enough, so it's a good thing.
Okay, so we are live. Hello, everybody. Hello, Dolores.
Hi
Hello,
guys.
Teresa. And hello, Holly. Thank you all for being here. Please do share this as much as you can so we can get a few other people here.
Oh, Joe, I don't know. People are saying they can't hear. Can you guys talk about whether or not you can hear us?
Can you hear us? I think Teresa was saying that,
Oh, before 9 o'clock.
yeah,
Okay.
before 9 o'clock, right?
Okay.
I'm pretty sure people can hear us, but let us see whether they can or they can't.
I'm sure they can. Because Holly's saying hi, Joe.
Hello, Holly. It's
Hi,
great to see you
Holly.
here.
All good. Glad to see you. Hi, Kay.
And Kay, we love to see you here too.
I
So
love to
thank
see
you for
everybody that shows up. Teresa.
coming. Okay, I'm
Holly.
going to take
Kay.
a few minutes to share on Facebook. I'm going to
Okay.
take away the promo at this point.
Hey, while Joe's sharing, Kay, tell me, what part of Ohio are you in? Since I'm going to come and see you. Things I don't know. Okay. Hi, Holly. Oops, I gotta mute my phone. There we go. Oh, you're in Canton. Okay.
Yeah, well, there's nothing anymore except the Football Hall of Fame, says Kay.
I'm not sure how far Canton is from Pittsburgh, and I'm a little north of Pittsburgh.
The Senate voted to reverse
I'll
Biden's
look it up.
vaccine mandate.
I haven't been to Canton since I was a little kid.
Oh, did you go to Canton?
We drove through once. What do we got here? Go start. Susan Sarandon. Check it out. Oh, I already bought one. Yeah. Captain Oculus. We did okay, so the Ragtag Band is a group of folks who does a really terrific job at promoting things. Like
Oh,
whenever,
yeah, the Ragtag Band, you mean?
yes, and whenever there is um, like they pushed the voting reminders to tell people to get out the vote, on the 5th or the 6th because of the recall for Krishama. They, anytime that there is a execution, federal execution coming up in a state, uh, you know, we put pressure to try and get the governors to put a stay. We get people to call, and they do a great job. And they did a artists for healthcare push for the Red Berets yesterday, which was wonderful of them to do.
Yes.
And Susan Sarandon grabbed Captain Optomicus, I guess is how you say that. He did a tweet and asked her if, he said, "Hey, Susan Sarandon, could you help get and I'm paraphrasing, but could you help get the Red Berets the kind of attention they need?" And she quote tweeted it and said, "Check it out, I already bought one," which was amazing
Yeah,
because
that was.
once in a while she would like stuff that we've done, but I don't think we've ever had an actual response. No, I know we haven't. We've never had an actual response from her in the years that we've been doing this.
Uh,
So
there
she
is a
bought a
picture.
beret.
There is a picture of her with her red beret on.
Oh, sure, but there's a picture of her in a red cap, which wasn't a knitted red beret, and then after that she bought one. But we just grabbed that because there was Susan Sarandon with Nina Turner and Dr. Dooley in what could have been, seen as a red beret. So we ran with it.
Good.
And she's always been very, we're all on the same page when it comes to, the Bernie campaign, the policies, healthcare, Don Ziegler, obviously. So yeah, that was really exciting. And it was Louis the cellist, who, that was his old Twitter handle. He's changed it now. I think it's Louis the Red Beret, New York, or something like that. Anyhow.
Oh, how nice.
Yeah, he did it. He was the one who came up with the idea. He did it without, anything. He just put a knitting circle together.
I know.
Knitting circle.
Yes, I know he did.
And that's what the push was about. And we filled up all the spaces, and then we opened it up and doubled it. And that's tomorrow from 7 to 10. Please come join us if you haven't signed up. I need to pin the link, and I will pin the link to my Red Berets Penn, PENN account, so that you can sign up. Please come hang out with us. You don't have to spend the whole time. It's an in and out kind of thing. You can come for an hour. You can come for 10 minutes. We're going to talk.
You're right. It's from 7 to 10 p.m. tomorrow.
Yep.
It's p.m. and I'm going to be there.
Yes, you are. And we would love to have everybody there. It's 3 hours. If you remember, just drop in. We'd love to have you.
Yeah, for that announcement, we should have put on our red beret hat, you see.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get started.
Lana's here. Hi, Lana.
Hey, Lana. So glad that you're here.
Thank you for posting that, Teresa. That's
There's
great.
noise coming through your mic. So,
trying to get my plates out of my camera angle.
Okay.
There we go.
So what causes that clicking sound when you do that?
That's me bringing the camera focus closer so that you don't see my plates hanging on my dining room wall.
So when you bring it closer, there's a click to the...
It's literally a button I have to click.
Right, and the button clicks and picked up. I got it. I just wondered about that. Okay, so here we are. The way we're going to start this off is with just an account of the characteristics, of fascism. It's a classical account. When I created it, I drew a lot from Mussolini and what he had to say about it, because he was really, the first one to define fascism, in any way. But then I mixed that up with other characteristics that come from the literature on authoritarianism and authoritarian societies and totalitarian societies. I've been a student of those for a very long time. So this is kind of a synthetic view, but drawing largely on the Mussolini definition. So I'm going to share some slides. I only have a few. This is not going to be very, very extensive here.
Do we, can I just preface this real quick with what brought us to doing this topic?
Go ahead.
So I hope you all are aware, and I'm sure you are, that they actually released Stephen Donziger from jail today. And if you
wasn't that wonderful?
Yes, it was, and that happened in the afternoon. If you do not know this, I'm going to tell you now that Katie Halper and Crystal Ball and Brianna Greyjoy and Marianne Williamson did a 3-hour podcast last night. It was under Katie Halper's YouTube channel.
Yeah, right. It was on her channel. Okay, but it was done in Crystal's studio.
Oh, that's right. They did it in Crystal's studio. That is correct. And they went through for 3 hours from the beginning. They went all the way through the entire situation around what happened in Ecuador. It was Ecuador, right? I'm not getting that wrong.
It was Ecuador.
Yes, what happened in Ecuador,
Absolutely Ecuador.
and then it was a case that was brought against Chevron, but Chevron didn't own. It was
Uh,
it was
okay, it's sort of backwards, actually. The case was brought against but Texaco.
really that it was Texaco had it when the case was brought first initially.
Yes. In other words,
Okay,
the action was taken against them, but Chevron acquired but Texaco.
after the case was filed.
Yes, after the case was filed, I
Oh,
think
I didn't know that. Okay.
perhaps even after the case was decided.
Mm,
It was some years that
yeah,
Danziger and his compatriots were fighting but Texaco.
got it. Got it.
Okay. And so Chevron basically inherited the suit, okay, and inherited also the decision against. Uh, I think actually by the time the decision was made, it was made against Chevron. Okay, but we'll go over some of the facts of the case in just a few minutes.
So anyhow, after this is all over, if you have not watched that, I highly recommend it. If you are limited to time, we're going to go through some of this tonight, but you really want to hear the discussion that went on. They had Robert Woods on, they had David Sirota on. David Sirota wrote an article on this today too, Joe, and it's excellent.
Yes, they did. Okay, and Rick Wolf also was on there. And to me, Rick Wolf made a very decisive point. Later on, I'm going to play a clip from from Rick Wolf.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm sorry. I was calling him Robert Woods. Sorry, it's Wolf.
Oh, so
Um,
you were thinking of Rick Wolf as opposed to Robert Woods.
yes, I
Oh,
think
okay.
so. I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
Wait, who's? Oh, it doesn't matter. Um, they have the
The
lawyers.
Democratic Socialist economist, okay,
Yeah,
is Rick Wolf.
I thought his name was Richard. Oh yeah, Richard. Never mind.
Yeah, Richard,
Richard
right?
Wolf. And there were a couple. Oh, Nina Turner was there, and these people are so. I mean, we know them because of the years that we've been interacting with them, watching them, hanging on their candidacies. Brianna Greyjoy, the comms director for the Bernie campaign of 2020. Uh, Sirota was a speechwriter the second time around. Um, the lawyers for Amnesty International were there. They interviewed them. Uh, it was just a fabulous discussion that wasn't your typical scripted, shall we say, talking points that you get from mainstream media. It was easy flowing, methodical. The perspectives were incredible. Please watch it. And if you don't have time to do the whole thing, watch the last hour.
Yeah, right. Okay, and the ladies were also very, very good. I think especially Marianne Williamson
Mm-hmm.
was outstanding. But Katie and Crystal, they were great. And Brianna Joy Gray is always great, and she was great here too.
She really
But
was.
I thought the most outstanding of the four was actually Marianne Williamson. And also, maybe not so strangely, uh, when Danziger came home, the first person he gave an interview to, okay, was Marianne Williamson.
Did he? Is that today? Oh,
Yeah,
how
so she had the
wonderful.
first interview. Yes, I had it up just recently. In fact, just before we tuned in at 8:45, okay, I was watching the interview.
I didn't even know that happened.
Okay, so check it out after we're finished. Okay, so that's sort of the context, okay, and background, and the reason why that brought up the subject, okay, of fascism, it was because the Danziger case is a clear case of corporations combining with government, okay, in a dominant way to control outcomes, okay, of justice, to control the normal functions, okay, of government, so that those functions get to be privatized. And that is one of the marks or characteristics, okay, of fascism. So that's why it brought up the subject, okay, of fascism. And that's been clear for some time, but in this discussion that Lisa, okay, is talking about, the link to fascism was made very explicitly by Rick Wolff as part, okay, of pulling together the whole discussion. And I thought his remarks on that, though short, were very compelling. But before we get to that, let's get to the slides. So there's the first one, the characteristics of fascism, just a title slide. Uh,
Joe, you're not sharing your screen anymore. I don't know what happened.
well, I wasn't intending to share.
Okay.
I have only 3 slides.
Okay.
So I put them in, okay, as images. So what I'm doing is successfully sharing the images. That was just the first image. And now there's the second one, which is the first screen with the characteristics of fascism on it. So I blow up that screen now. First characteristic is actually nationalism. It's an emotional commitment to one's nation and its leader as a single, a unified, organic entity, superior to all others and deserving of an absolute form, okay, of loyalty. That point is a very important point. Obviously, the United States is not there yet with respect to that kind of thing. But you can well see that if the right person takes over and completes the work that Trump had started, that we'll be getting into that kind of conception of, of nationalism and the creation or the attempted creation of that kind of emotional commitment but to the United States. The second characteristic of fascism is totalitarianism. It includes a continuous top-down form, okay, of mobilization of the population. In other words, keeping the population involved, okay, in activism, but it's activism coming from the top. It's a manufactured activism. It's an artificial activism. It's using the techniques of mass communication to mobilize people to go to events. And we see this beginning in Trump's events and the way he mobilizes people at those events to feel a certain kind of unity with almost the mob. In other words, the people who are getting their buttons pressed by the speaker and who are responding in a very automaton-like sort of way. The third characteristic is continuous propagandizing by the mass media, hewing to a party line defined by the state, its leader, and a single party intertwined with it, also involving a denial of zones, okay, of privacy. Now, so far, we have not seen this here in the United States.
Wait a minute. Hold on a second, Joe, because I'm thinking about this. And I know that this is based off of history in a lot of ways. But if you substitute state with corporation, aren't we already right here?
I don't think we're quite here because the propagandizing is not being done by a supreme leader. In other words, it's being done more by, I would say, a block. The mass media is part of a block. It's related to large corporations,
Mm-hmm.
also political interests.
Mm-hmm.
They're joining together to create a party line, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not yet a party line that's precisely defined by the state, okay, and by the leader of the state. And there's no really single party yet. Okay, now,
But wait a minute. I will argue that we only have one.
I don't think that this
Isn't that is what centrism is, though, Joe? They all are serving corporate interests.
we completely agree that both parties are serving the corporate interests, but not always the same corporate interests. And not only it's not a situation where it's being done in a unified way. When we compare it to the Italian form of totalitarianism, or the German form of totalitarianism, okay, or the Russian form, okay, of totalitarianism, the unity of part, or the communist Chinese form of totalitarianism, at the time, okay, of Mao,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you don't have the same degree of unity, okay, of party line, and you don't have here the entire denial of zones of privacy. Now, that's not to say that there are not trends toward that. We can see the trends. We see, for example, the surveillance, okay, of people and invasions of our privacy that are becoming more and more intrusive, okay, to privacy. And we can see in terms of the judicial end of this, how the Supreme Court is beginning to deny that there is a right, okay, of privacy. And that is going to come together, or at some time in the future could come together with a single party trying to deny zones of privacy for individuals. Certainly, if we move forward with the unification, okay, of the religious doctrine with corporate interests and with the political interests of the Republican Party, and we go forward with the Republican Party uh, with its anti-democratic end, trying to overthrow elections, uh, we are beginning to see the unification of a party line in a much more concentrated way than we have ever seen before. But the kind of propagandizing by the mass media that we're used to here is more a form of inverted but totalitarianism, where things are more subtly controlled, where it's basically manipulation that is defining the means of control, okay, of the population. It's not as explicit as it was in Italy and Germany.
And my fear is that it won't be. I think that what we have right now are extremism. There's extremism going on, and there's obstructionism going on, and we all know that traditionally it has been a Republican, more of a Republican value of free market, deregulation, uh, you know, pro defense, contracting, and all of that kind of stuff. But Joe, they're all in some way, shape, or form, more than most of them, in the pockets of the special interest. And
Oh, they're
what,
all in the pockets of the special interests.
well, and I don't think we have an independent administration anymore.
Yeah, I'm not sure we've had one for quite some time.
Hmm.
But the point is, you still don't see a single party, the kind of party discipline that you saw in Italy, okay, or in Germany,
Right, because
or Russia.
we've got centrist going on, and I'm not trying to I want to just express a view because I believe this in my heart. I know that the history of this is that we end up producing a demagogue, and I also understand that once we have a demagogue, I don't. I mean, this we're in huge trouble. Okay, but we've already got the surveillance. We have the propaganda because everybody's being serving the same interests, right? And I think that the difference right now that I see is that we didn't need a dictator to do this. It's happened through the policies that have put
Well,
together and the court rulings that have brought all of this together over a shorter period of
brought,
time.
they have brought this all together in such a way that the people en masse have no more power
Yes,
concerning what the government does.
right.
But within the elite that does have power, there are various factions. There's the military-industrial complex. There's um, the religion complex. There's the medical-industrial complex. There's the fossil fuel industry complex.
And
So,
they're not warring factions, Joe. They're like this.
well, not warring factions yet, but but as the climate crisis gets worse, as it gets worse, there's potential for the fossil fuel faction to be in conflict with some of the other factions. We have to imagine also but what's going to happen. Okay, let's say the Supreme Court decides that Roe v. Wade, okay, is going out, and the protection of but free choice actually devolves to the state. Then, what are the religious people going to concentrate on then? Okay, at that time, in other words, one of their major goals will have been achieved. Will they not start to look at what's happening with respect to sustainability? They, after all, okay, are people. They can't ignore the climate emergency forever. Now, maybe the fossil fuel industry can, okay, because their economic interests are so closely involved in that. But okay, as far as the fundamentalist Christians are concerned, uh, they will have a care about what's happening to the environment sooner or later. That will bring them into conflict with the fossil fuel industry. There may also be conflicts between the medical industrial complex as well, okay, and other factions. And there's also the issue, okay, of the military industrial complex that defines as a national security risk the climate emergency. Sooner or later, they're going to want to do something about the climate emergency that's going to bring them into conflict with certain other elites. One function, one function of uh, some new leader who takes over, as head of the Republican Party, is going to be to try to aggregate all these interests, okay, and mediate between them, okay, or among them. And that person is likely to do so by tightening the controls of the totalitarian state and by paying off certain leaders in each of these factions in certain ways to try to gain total control, okay, of the situation. Of course, we see that the business elites say that they always want a free market, but the history, okay, of fascist countries, okay, and also common sense. I don't usually talk about common sense because it's so often wrong. But it does suggest, and in this case, it might be right, that when people talk about the free market and their allegiance to the free market, what they're really talking about is they don't want to have any state control.
They're talking about deregulation.
What they're talking about is deregulation
Yeah.
and not really free markets, okay, at
No.
all. What
Right.
they want to do is to dominate their particular end of the market in their industries. That's
Right.
what they are really looking for.
Hmm.
That opens the way to a planned economy. Okay, in some way, if the leader can play off the contending interests, and the history of fascism is that the fascists, that the state elites within a fascist state, sooner or later, do try to plan and control the economy in order to create a productive and disciplined people of all classes who work together against the quote parasitic elements in society to achieve the economic goals set by the state. And in classic fascism, one of those goals, okay, is autarky, establishing a state with an economy which is independent of all others and entirely self-sufficient. And why do they do this? In part because they want to create a state which is very strong and can be successful in war against other fascist states. Anyway, to go on to the next thing I would like to share.
Teresa, if we have our way, Teresa's asked a question, and I just want to read it if you don't mind, Joe.
Go ahead,
Um,
Lisa. Go
she
ahead.
says, I don't understand. She's talking about Miss Richard Wolff, and she is saying she would like to see them network more across who have public platforms. She'd like to see them connect in various concerned groups on a variety of issues. And then she says, I don't understand why they don't network to and from coordinated strikes and protests across the country. Stats show it takes 3.5% of a population, about 12 million here, to successfully change their government. Teresa, I think that what we're going to see is exactly what you're begging for here, what you wish would happen. I think that part of the reason why I felt that that podcast last night was so game changing, for lack of better words, because that's just what's coming to mind for me, is because all of those individuals did come together, and they are now. I mean, Don Ziegler got let out today. I personally believe that podcast last night had something to do with it. Now, nobody has to agree with me, but in my heart, I believe that. That's powerful. And now I think we might have the makings of how we get together around issues to do things that matter. Anyhow, there you go.
Okay, so on to the second and last of my slides on the characteristics, okay, of fascism. Okay, the next one is very important. It's respect for the profit motive, okay, of capitalism and for the primary role of privately owned and productive, supposedly productive corporations and businesses, but within a command economy. In other words, what occurred, okay, in Italy was these corporations aligning themselves, okay, with Mussolini, okay, and creating a command economy, even though ideologically they were supposed to be opposed to that. But what was dominant here was the profit motive.
Isn't that what we have with this early use authorization and the whole vaccine thing with Pfizer? I mean, we're still
Yes,
under that.
yes,
hmm
yes,
It's
yes,
here. It's here.
yes. It's here to some degree. It's an outgrowth of of neoliberalism. It may not be here to the extent it was in Germany, um, you know, uh, or to the extent it was okay in Italy, but it is here,
hmm
and
Oh, yeah, it is.
here. It's been here for some time. Now there hasn't been a command economy yet, but we're beginning to see the emergence of one with respect to, uh, I think, the military-industrial complex.
hmm
Okay, and also with respect to how we're handling the COVID emergency
hmm For sure.
and how the corporations are cooperating with the government,
hmm
uh, and how
I'm
the
not.
government is cooperating with the corporations and essentially letting the corporations be, letting them get
hmm
really massive profits in return for the promise of the corporations that they will contain COVID and that they'll create a situation where eventually we'll be able to get back to something like the economy that existed before, but perhaps now in a more hierarchical form, even more hierarchical than it was before.
So I can interject here real quick and ask you, don't you think that there is the same thing that has gone on in healthcare?
It's been going on in
It's
healthcare.
the same thing.
We've been seeing the emergence, okay, of that. And what we're seeing now, through the Medicare Advantage programs
And the privatization of Medicaid, same thing.
and the privatization, okay, of Medicaid, and now the DCE programs they're trying to get started.
And the whole piece of the puzzle that most people don't understand, which is that the insurance industry is running CMMI, and they have been for a long time. That's not new. It's just gotten new focus. But yes, that's been going on for 10 years.
But not simply the CMMI, but to some degree, they've already started running CMS.
So they've been running CMS. They've been running CMS. That's what that presentation that I did prior. That's been going on for years. And part of the problem, and I brought this up before, is the voting bloc, the big voting bloc in this country are the boomers. The boomers and then their parents' generation. That voting bloc is starting to age out. And the younger generations are starting to come back in. But the younger generations don't have the economic stability. They're very busy toiling, and they've been wage stagnated and everything else, and they're disillusioned. They have not been, and the other side of it too is that generation has not handed over the reins to power.
That's
So
right.
I'm drawing another parallel here, Joe, in that voting bloc has woken up to the fact of how bad the insurance industry has taken over all of this, but they weren't subjected to it back in 2014 and 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, all the way up. It hit that generation very recently, which is why it's on everybody's lips right now, because the only thing that either party really is paying attention to are their massive voting blocks. That's what they've always paid attention to. So, in that regard, I will say that the insurance industry's taken over healthcare. We've got the military-industrial complex, which is tied into fossil fuels, which is, I mean, I see corporate rule here. I do. And I see it from a policy standpoint. They've co-opted the representation. We don't need a figurehead. It's already happened, in my opinion.
Oh, I think so too.
Yeah, I mean, we're here. And traditionally, in the past, I don't think it came up that way. I think you got a totalitarian at the top that helped facilitate it all to happen. But what we've got too are people that are dog eat dog right now because there's so much of the population that is desperate. And when you're cheap, desperate labor, which does nothing for society, right? Or the general welfare, like the meaning of it in the Constitution, what you end up with are, people being looked at as just a resource that causes them, as it's an expense line that they need to keep low to keep their profits up. And people, instead of focusing on community, they don't have that kind of time. They can't keep themselves viable. I think we're there, Joe.
Well, with respect to what you're talking about, okay, we're there, but that's not the whole of the characteristics, okay, of fascism. So let's get to some of the others. There's support for some social welfare programs serving social integration with a national organic unity, and accompanied by opposition to egalitarianism. We haven't really seen that kind of thing quite yet. Okay, people are crying out for the strengthening of the social safety net.
Do we even have one, Joe?
Well, technically we have one, but the point is that in those classic fascist states, they did provide people with social welfare programs that they could participate in on condition that they were part and parcel of the organic unity of the nation state. Things were defined in that sort of social welfare structure hierarchically, because fascism is opposed to egalitarianism. But at the same time, people could rely on the fascist state for protection as long as they rendered their loyalty to the state. So we haven't seen that actually emerge yet because the corporations are so reluctant to provide people here in the United States with a functioning social safety net. We may well see that come about. However, it's going to depend on the leader and the politics created by the leader when we do get that leader. I'm not sure we're going to get Trump again in 2024, for a variety, of reasons. But we may well get a Republican leader who was smarter and more pragmatic, than Trump, in a larger sense, of pragmatism. And then we may see the emergence of that particular characteristic. Something that we're seeing now emerge is direct action, often violent, supported by an ideology of social Darwinism directed against the opponents of the state, both external, and internal. We are beginning to see the direct and violent action, which, is being taken by the supporters of the emerging ideology, of Trumpism. But they certainly have a view of the world that is social Darwinist, And if the Trumpians were to gain control of the state, but then, of course, the people that are considered to be subhuman by the supporters of Trump would be considered also opponents of the state. And then we would get that official state sanctioned kind of violence against them that we've seen in other fascist states. What we're seeing now is the beginnings of that. And as we get to one of the articles that we've selected here tonight, we'll see the patterns starting to emerge. Next, of course, is militarization of the police and external militarism. And we've got that now in both instances. In other words, our policies, of empire are certainly militaristic kinds of policies. We're fighting lots of small wars or small actions, across the globe. And domestically here, our police are militarized. I mean, right now.
No, they've been since 9/11.
Yep. But even now, increasingly militarized.
Mm-hmm.
Seems more and more militarization.
Yes, because we're concerned about security because of the climate refugees that it's going to bring about.
Yes. Now, what we have to watch out for is the young people who are at sea now, with lots of pessimism, and little hope. The fascist movements will try to scoop them up and rely on them for direct action to use against the opponents, of fascism. For example, people like us. And then
expand on that, Joe, because I'm not. Maybe I'm dumb here, but I'm not following. Give me some. Extrapolate.
Okay, so there's something of a movement that is starting to emerge for young people who are supportive of the Trumpists to take a direct action against people who are seen as the opponents of the Trumpists.
Okay.
And we're seeing that in the form of a pattern where the people at the top of the pyramid, at the top of the Republican Party, make jokes about violence being taken against certain people, such as AOC, for example.
Mm-hmm.
We just seen it, in the last few weeks.
A couple days ago. Yep.
Yes, and then we have some of the young people who are part of the masses supporting the rightist movements, and they get involved in violent demonstrations, and threats against these very same people. So it's necessary for AOC, and for the rest of the squad to look to physically protect themselves, because some of the office holders in the Republican Party are whipping up the base and modeling in certain ways violent action against these others, who eventually, of course, will be seen as enemies of the state.
Well, and the worst part about it is that what I'm witnessing, and tell me if you think I'm off base here, Joe, but we've got Bobart and her crazy stuff, which is
Lauren Bobart, exactly,
coming out, against Muslims, right? And then we have the selling of arms to the Saudis, so they continue this, and I'm going to say this, horrific blockade, starvation, and genocide against everyone in Yemen. And if you think it's only a couple 100,000 or, whatever people, I'm telling you it's millions. It was millions that were
Yes,
going to
okay. It's
starve to death
millions
three
because
years
Yemen
ago.
is surprisingly large and
Mhm.
surprisingly populous.
I mean, it is the
And well,
misery in Yemen is horrific. If you want to see if you can find it, although Twitter's being really shitty, um, Opti sanitize, OPDE sanitize.
yes.
That's the hashtag. We were doing that years ago. You'll see it. And they took the Twitter account down. We got it right back up, and we forced the mass media to actually start showing the pictures of the starvation that was going on back then. So I hate to say it, Joe, but here we are with the centrist shit again, right?
Yeah.
Because we've got this going on, and the Democrats and the Republicans, the centrism again. Let's go arm the Saudis because I just can't even. I can't even. The word gymnastics to sell this stuff is disgusting. Seriously. And we had what, 63 senators that voted for this? Maybe more. I can't quite exactly remember.
I think it was 63, actually.
Okay, so Joe, that's the administration, the Democrats, and then you've got the
63
Republican,
senators voted for it, and that majority, of course, is filibuster proof.
and then
Only
right, and then
63.
and then you've got Bobart and her. Oh, I'm sorry, I cannot be ladylike or nice or anything. I'm just gonna
Yeah,
pick.
we will get to her a little later.
But what we're doing though is we're going to arm a country, and yet we're going to condemn those that are here that are of a Muslim faith. I mean, it's ridiculous. It is ridiculous.
Yes, but it's typical of totalitarian states.
Well, and like I said,
They often act in highly contradictory ways because they're training their citizenry to compartmentalize their minds. So they cannot make the connections to see the contradictions in the regime. Okay, the next and final characteristic I want to call out
Teresa, you're not
is
really serious, right?
what?
Teresa's asking us, why don't we do a coup? No, we never want to do coups. But go ahead.
Well, but in a certain way, well, we'll get to this later on. Okay, but anyway, the point is there is in traditional fascism, classic fascism, there's a commitment to traditional male female roles and to non deviant heterosexual behavior, accompanied by strong opposition to homosexual and other behavior it sees as deviant. And we're certainly beginning to see this emerge on the Republican side.
I think we've pretty much closed it out with the idea of taking away your reproductive freedoms of women, the homophobic nature of the Republican stance that we've seen over and over again. But it's not just the Republicans. Again, I hate saying Democrat Republican because I do not see a separation between the two of them. I see, I mean, I've got two senators traditionally in this state who were both against it, abortion, right? I mean, we had a presidential candidate in 2016 who picked a VP who was a pro-lifer, who was a Democrat, right? I'm
Yeah,
sorry, but
Tim
this to
Kaine. Yeah,
me is ridiculous.
Tim Kaine. And by
Yeah.
the way, Tim Kaine is one of my senators.
Ugh.
And the other senator, of course, is Mr. Warner, Mark Warner.
Oh my God, that's right.
And he, of course, is standing there just in back, okay, of Joe Manchin saying, "You go, guy, you go, guy,"
Right?
just so long as I don't have to do it myself. Okay, but anyway, so we're there, I think, or very close to there with respect to this characteristic. So as we've gone through the various characteristics, I think you can see that with many of these characteristics, the background conditions are there. What is not there at this point, at least, okay, is the charismatic leader who is leading the party to victory. And I don't really know that Trump will be able to come back in 2024 and serve that role. But believe me, the
Oh my God.
party is looking for other people who may be able to serve that role. I suppose the leading candidate right now is probably Ron DeSantis. He's a guy who's too clever by half politically, and he's going to be a serious threat to take over things as we go forward.
I've actually thought that maybe Toomey might run for president.
Hmm?
Uh, I've had thoughts about, but I think Manchin has signaled that he wants to be the governor.
That he wants to be the governor, okay, of West Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to go back where he can feather his nest and people will leave him alone and he can enrich his family the easy way. Okay, I think that's really what he wants. He doesn't want to stay on the national stage as long
Yeah.
as long as he can find another safe place where. Okay, I think Manchin, okay, is a little bit lazy, and to run the national government, uh, he may view that as hard work that he doesn't want to undertake, along with many problems that he doesn't want to undertake. I think he probably thinks if he goes back to West Virginia and becomes the governor, okay, of West Virginia, he can live out his days, okay, in a position of power while he continues to enrich his family, which is
Yeah,
important.
I think that Joe is smart enough to know when what's coming is out of his wheelhouse. But you guys, what is more frightening in that regard is Connor Lamb, who already sits on the congressional energy or the congressional energy subcommittee.
The the House,
House, yes,
right?
House energy subcommittee.
Yeah,
And he's running for Senate here, which we are in Pennsylvania, southwestern Pennsylvania, right across the border. I mean, us, Ohio, West Virginia. This is a energy extraction area.
yes, it
Okay,
is, and they sure
so
want to frack a lot there.
we do drill, spill, crack, and frack. That's what I call it. Um,
Drill, spill, crack, and frack.
hmm hmm
Okay.
um, Cracker plant takes the gases from uh, the fracking. They pipe it to a plant, cracker plant, that uses that to create pellets that are used in the making of plastic. And the volatile organic chemicals that emits into the atmosphere are a big problem. Um, so yeah. So what I guess I'm trying to say here is Connor Lamb is a Democrat. Okay, this is why I'm just so fervently against this whole red Democrat Republican. To me, it's just like, flip your practice jersey. You're on this side of the court now. You're scrimmaging against this team. That's all this is. And we do not want Connor Lamb in that position. I promise you, because he's been my rep. Um, so along all of those lines, right? Again, these people are supposed to be Democrats.
Okay, so what we've tried to establish here is that when you look at a characterization of fascism that comes out of classical fascism, we're very close to it on a number of these characteristics. We don't have a fascism here yet because we don't have the total domination of one party yet. And we don't have that one party that's aggregating the interests, all of the major interests into itself, but quite yet. And we don't have the dominant leader who's necessary for fascism quite yet, though in some ways Trump comes close to it. Okay, of course, but he's not really quite there yet. But since you can see how close we are, you also see that with but certain respects, okay, in certain respects, uh, we are there. We are there, okay, at fascism. With respect to basic penetration of the government by the large corporate interests, we are very, very close to that. Case in point, of course, is the Danziger case. So let's get back to the Danziger case. There was an article which appeared not too long ago, I think, in Common Dreams by Jessica Corbett. And okay, we'll share that. Okay, so okay, so I'm scrolling now, but you can see me scrolling, I think. Can you not? Yeah, I think you can. Okay, so the Democrats have been raising alarm in connection with the Danzig case about the use of private prosecutors in federal court, because that's what happened to Danziger. Now, this was questioned by Senator Markey and Sheldon Whitehouse. And when was that? Last Friday. Let's get the date of this. It was July 30th, 2021. So it was some time ago.
Yeah, yeah. That kind of threw me because I didn't. I was shocked by the date on that, but yeah.
Yeah, right. And Markey and Whitehouse said that they had sent a letter to a judge. Okay, her name is Roslyn R. Mouskoff, director of the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts, with inquiries about the practice and federal rules of criminal procedure. Okay, and they talk about the private prosecutions, okay, of Danziger, and say these prosecutions are highly unusual and can raise concerning questions of fundamental fairness in our criminal justice system. And specifically, Markey and Whitehouse wanted to know how often federal judges have charged individuals with criminal contempt under Rule 42, which is, what Danziger was charged with, and how frequently the government declined to prosecute, resulting in the appointment of a private prosecutor over the past 5 years. And they also inquired about the outcomes, asking whether are there disparities in dismissals, convictions, plea bargains, or sentences in public prosecutor contempt cases versus private prosecutor contempt cases. They asked about potential tests that judges must apply in determining whether a private prosecutor is disinterested, citing the U.S. Supreme Court's 1987 decision in Young versus the United States, ex rel vuitan a fis. A fis means and son, so vuitan a fis, as well as whether private prosecutors appointed under the role must disclose conflicts of interest and how the court avoids such interest. Markey tweeted Stephen Danziger took on Chevron and was convicted on criminal contempt charges. At Senator Whitehouse and I have serious questions about the use of private prosecutors in federal court and the administration of justice. And so they sent a letter. So they were concerned and they inquired about it and they called for investigations. They wanted to know about the ethics rules governing the private prosecutors, including whether they differ from policies for public prosecutors and those for judges who were appointing the private prosecutors, and they wondered, quote, should there be a pool of private prosecutors from which random selection is made? Because, of course, in the Danziger case, there was no random selection. The federal judge selected the prosecutors, the private prosecutors, simply on his own authority.
And those private prosecutors had a conflict of interest because they actually had Chevron as a client.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Quote, if the criminal contempt involves disrespect towards or criticism of a judge, that judge is disqualified from presiding at the contempt trial or hearing unless the defendant consents, unquote. Noting that, they asked, must the judge recuse him or herself? Is the judge permitted to hand select another judge to preside over the prosecution of a criminal contempt case rather than follow standard random assignment processes? And Markey White House's final question for Mouskoff was, quote, what additional procedural safeguards are necessary to ensure fair prosecutions for criminal contempt under Rule 42? They cite the experience of Danziger, who was under house arrest for over 700 days. His case has provoked international outrage and demands for investigations. On Monday, U.S. District Judge Boretta Preska found Danziger guilty on 6 counts of criminal contempt of court, according to Gizmodo. Quote, no sentencing date has yet been set, but he could be forced to serve 6 months or pay a fine of up to $5,000, quote unquote. Danziger joined lawyers and scientists investigating health and environmental impacts of oil industry activity in the Ecuadorian Amazon in the early 1990s. I believe the year was 1993. Nearly 2 decades later, in 2011, he won billions of dollars in damages, nearly $9 billion, for thousands of people affected by Chevron's pollution of the region, a decision upheld by Ecuador's Supreme Court. Rather than paying up, Chevron has alleged fraud and fought back. Okay, there's a very good interview between Jordan Chariton, and Danziger about the story. Danziger's claim that the fundamental story is Chevron is abusing the United States. Following the initial ruling in 2011, Chevron filed the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organization, RICO, lawsuit against Danziger in New York City. And U.S. District Judge Lewis Kaplan of the Southern District of New York, a former corporate lawyer with ties to Chevron, ruled in 2014 that the Ecuadorian judgment was the result of fraud and thus invalid. Kaplan ordered Danziger to turn over his electronic devices, his computer, to Chevron, which Danziger refused to do because he pointed out that doing so would violate attorney-client privilege. Kaplan responded by charging him with 6 counts of criminal contempt of court. So Kaplan had a conflict of interest. He clearly had it.
Huge. Mm-hmm.
Huge conflict of interest. And the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York declined to prosecute Danziger.
Right.
So Kaplan went to the private law firm of Seward and Kissel, which it was later revealed had represented Chevron as recently as the previous year, to pursue the prosecution. Kaplan also selected Judge Preska, who was affiliated with the Chevron-funded Federalist Society, to preside over the case. She is the judge who found Danziger guilty on Monday.
Mm-hmm.
In the 245-page ruling, Preska wrote that Danziger repeatedly and willfully, quote unquote, defied Kaplan's orders and, quote, it's time to pay the piper. Danziger said he had a strong appeal and he looked forward to the opportunity to brief the appellate court on this obvious travesty of justice. And he repeated his call for Judge Preska to, quote, release me immediately so I can return to my human rights work and help those in Ecuador who are suffering and dying because of Chevron's dumping of billions of gallons of cancer-causing toxic waste into the Amazon. Now, while this was going on, Representative by Jim McGovern, who's a Democrat of Massachusetts, and by the way, the chairperson of the Rules Committee in the House. So he is a very powerful congressman. And he's also quite a progressive. So he follows Nancy Pelosi to the letter. But when he gets to act on his own, he turns out to be very progressive. In a pair of tweets, he reiterated his demand that U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland review the deeply concerning process by which this case has played out. And he called for a full and fair review of the situation. And he sent a letter to the Justice Department, serious concerns. And there were a number of people who signed that letter. And guess who the people were? They were Cori Bush and Rashida Tlaib. And let's see if I can get a better look. Jamal Bowman, AOC, and Jamie Raskin. So, 1, 2, 3, 4 members of the squad signed that particular letter. They were joined by Jamie Raskin, who can very often be counted upon to join them, and by McGovern, the chairperson of the Rules Committee, who's kind of the odd man out here, since he perhaps would not be normally expected to join them in anything. But in this instance, he evidently was outraged, and he did.
Is it in here, Joe? Do they talk about the witness that was used in this prosecution?
Not in this particular article, but this witness was bought by Chevron.
Yeah. And then he later recanted and admitted that he was bought.
Yes. That too. So there are some statements by Rashida here that are good statements, but I'm not going to go through, okay, and read them. There was one thing she said, a final quote. I will quote. I'm proud to stand with my congressional colleagues in calling for Attorney General Garland to investigate the unprecedented and unjust illegal assault on their attorney, Stephen Danziger. And she added, quote, and to fight back against the unchecked corporate power that is rigging our justice system. And so now what I want to do is play a little clip from the function last night from Katie Halper and Crystal, Marianne Williamson, okay, and Brianna Joy Gray. The part I want to specifically play is the statement by Rick Wolff, which I thought was a very powerful statement that really kicked home the point that what we're looking at here is fascism. So let's pull this up. This part of the conversation started at 2 hours and 17 minutes. So I'm going to push this forward. Let me switch to that tab here. In fact, let me do this. Let me show you give you the full screen view on this. And then switch to YouTube so I can get the clip. I'm actually a few minutes later towards the end.
I think it was 2:11 that starts, Joe. I might be wrong.
Well.
Oh,
no,
you only wanted a piece of it. Okay.
But it also starts about 2:17. In other words, there are the ladies there in the picture.
That's what I would like briefly to talk about. Capitalism is a system. We know that. Marianne just talked about this is a systemic problem. One of the features of this system is that it does away with small businesses. Competition, which we supposedly celebrate, is the mechanism whereby the losers are absorbed by the winners, and we end up with fewer and fewer and larger enterprises. Long ago, Americans understood that this concentration of wealth and power threatens basic values that we're supposed to be committed to. So as far back as 1890, we had the Sherman Antitrust Act, 1914, a follow-up Clayton Act. We have had efforts to stop, limit, break up the trusts. To be honest and to be brief, it doesn't work. These reforms have not been able to do what they were intended to do. Nothing illustrates that better than looking at a corporation like Chevron and then taking a look at all of the things companies like this do nowadays. And if we put them all together with a focus on Donziger, you can begin to understand what's at stake here. So, for example, Chevron is one of the few companies, together with a few governments, that set the price of energy in this world. We are all held hostage for heating our homes, for running our vehicles, whatever it is, by a tiny handful of people who get together in fancy hotels around the world periodically to determine whether there'll be more or less of the fossil fuels and what prices, therefore, we will have to pay. Here's another example. We are now suffering, after 2 years of economic crash and a pandemic, we are suffering an inflation. But I'm the economist. Let me explain. An inflation happens when corporations raise prices. That's all that it is. And they don't do that for any other reason than making more profit. And I know that because they say so. That's what they do. And now we are learning not only are they shaping our oil and prices and our inflation and so much else about our environment, but if you dare, like Stephen Donziger, if you dare step in there and say, wait a minute, you're gone too far, you shouldn't at least not do this on top of all of that, you get assaulted by the concentration of wealth and power that overwhelms the judicial system, with one side being able to afford 1,000 lawyers and the other side nowhere near that. Money is buying the justice, just like money is buying the two parties. I mean, we are looking at a concentration of wealth and power that now literally runs vendettas against people who stand up and say, I am going to fight against this. If we don't do something, we really are headed, and I don't use the word lightly, to that coming together of corporate power and a subservient government that has a name in history, and it's called fascism.
We've just mentioned this climate reporter, Kate Aradoff, and she's written this book where she basically argues that we're not going to get climate reform under capitalism. If that's the case, if you agree with that statement, what do we do in a moment like this where we all make jokes about late stage capitalism all the time, but it feels pretty concrete at the moment? What kind of moves do we make in a moment where we see all of these corporations being able to put these externalities out on the public, make so much money, have so much profit, co-opt the legal system in the way they've done, and it leaves us kind of feeling hopeless at times? What's next if the end of capitalism is the only way out?
Well, for me, it's what you're doing. It's being willing, which you are. And so many for long weren't willing to do it, which is to link the particular issue that aggravates you, the racism, the sexism, the ecological destruction, whatever it is. Have the courage to say what you just said. This problem is part of a systemic crisis of capitalism, particularly American capitalism, that is in trouble and is trying to hold on to the unequal distribution of wealth and power at a time when the system is in trouble. The more we link the particular to the more general, the more we will create the conditions for a coming together of all of the specific struggles, because they will understand that they have something in common. The changing of the system that is behind all of the obstacles that they face. The more we do that, the closer we will get. And look, I share with you the frustration. It is hard. It is taking so long. I give myself solace, and maybe it'll help you too. There was a famous political leader, whose name I won't mention, who was berated by his associates. It's taking so long. It's taking so long. Decades, nothing is happening. And he smiled and he looked at them and he said, "You're right. For decades, nothing happens. And then in a few weeks, decades happen."
Right.
Pretty cool. A pretty cool statement, but he put his finger right on it. And you all saw that. And now, here's something else which is going to highlight another very dangerous part of the system of fascism, that we're stating. And this is from another article, from Medium, from a guy by the name of Umair Haque, I think it's pronounced. Could be Hack also, but I'm not sure how he pronounces it. He is a very good writer, and I don't exactly follow him assiduously, but every once in a while, I check out something where I think he may really have put his finger on something. And I think that he has done that here, as well. Let me get the whole thing here. Actually, I don't quite want to give this view. I'm sorry that I did that. I want to keep us in it. So there we go, but I want to give the full screen here. Okay, so let me switch now to that tab. Okay, what Haidt does, in this article is he points out a pattern. He points out a dynamic that is going on within the Republican Party and how it impacts the rest of the system. And there is a picture, of Congressman Boebert, who's a Republican, of Colorado. and she calls out Ilhan Omar and says to Ilhan that she doesn't sympathize with terrorists. And the article talks about a feud that's erupted between the two congresswomen, specifically Boebert and Omar. Okay, Omar, of course, is one of the first. Is one of the first, Muslim members of Congress, and she wears a hijab. Lauren Boebert is a rising star on the right, and she branded Omar a member of the jihad squad. Then she implied that Omar was a suicide bomber, saying it would only be safe to ride in an elevator with her as long as she wasn't wearing a backpack. And then MJT, who is actually Marjorie Taylor Greene, so I think he got his initials wrong there. It should be MTG, stepped in and told the one member of the GOP who had the sense to criticize Boebert to, quote, go hang out with your real gal pals of the jihad squad. So our media, at least much of it, is treating this as light entertainment. Ha-ha, a feud or a scandal. But Hake says it's none of those things. What is going on here, in a word, fascism is? Let's put it as bluntly and plainly as possible. This is fascism, and it's only a step in a larger cycle and pattern and dynamic. And he says, how so? Well, to begin with, I'm no fan of the religion of any kind. Ilhan Omar is being scapegoated. Are there some Muslims who are jihadists? Sure, a tiny, tiny minority. There are about 2 million Muslims in the world. If they were billion Muslims in the world, sorry. If they were all jihadists, we'd be in the midst of a world war. He says we are, but only against COVID. So Boebert, and MTG are openly scapegoating and smearing Omar with the actions of a tiny few who are the worst of her religion. He points out that is a form of collective punishment, and all those things are classic fascism. And if you think this is just about the Muslims, think again. MTG has repeatedly compared mask mandates to the Holocaust. And Paul Gosar tweeted out a cartoon video in which he kills AOC. This isn't about hatred of Muslims. This is about escalating hatred towards those they don't consider human.
Yeah.
Worse, they're doing all this to open guffaws from crowds. That is inciting violence. Why? Because by now it's very clear that the American right has a kind of two-pronged strategy to destabilize the society. On the one hand, it scapegoats social groups it regards as subhuman, using terms like, quote, the jihad squad, unquote. On the other, it openly deconstructs the rule of law and encourages vigilantism. The result of all that is already plain to see. Teenagers gun down people in the streets. Teachers and principals and local election officials get death threats. What is all this? It's a pattern of social destabilization. And by the way, that's what fascists do before they take over. They work to destabilize the rest of society. By now, what the GOP is trying to establish is very, very clear. The top incites violence by encouraging intimidation, by scapegoating, by legitimizing hate as a, quote, joke, unquote, or a bold form of, quote, free speech, unquote. In response, the Trumpist base erupts in bilious fury. They take all that seriously. Hence, by now, the death threats, the teenagers gunning down people in the streets. All this is a classic pattern of fascism. When Bobert calls Omar a member of the Jihad Squad, what is it? It's not just scapegoating and smearing. It's also a lie. What is fascism based on? Big lies. The lie about Omar in particular is a little one, but only in the sense that it is part of a big lie. The classic big lie of fascism, those subhumans are responsible for our woes. All we have to do is cleanse ourselves of them, and we, the master race, will rise again because we're pure of blood and true of faith, and the soil belongs to us. Yeah, I remember the demonstrators in Charlottesville. Blood and soil, you shall not replace us. The little lie about Omar is part of a pattern of big lies. Some of those big lies you know well because American media discusses them. The election was stolen. Some American media covers abysmally. The CRT's hysteria is that they're coming for our kids, quote unquote. Then there's, quote, they're coming for our wives, unquote. Hence their aggressive movement paving the way for the repeal of Roe.
Mm-hmm.
All these big lies are classic elements of fascism. They're coming for our kids, wives, our country, the purity of our blood. We're the persecuted ones. They are stealing from us. So he goes on, okay, in this vein, I hope you see the pattern. Figures like Bobert and MTG are telling the biggest lie of fascism and making it personal. That is a very, very dangerous line to cross. Even Trump only did it in the abstract. Quote, the hated subhumans are stealing from us, our country, our election. But now it's personal. The hated subhumans begin with Omar and Tlaib and AOC, minorities, but women. Now they have faces and names. Now they're targets. And so is anyone who looks like them, defends them, associates with them, is one of them. When the biggest lie of fascism gets personal, a society is in a very, very dark place. And that is what fascism is. And if you don't see it in what the rising stars of the GOP are doing, then I suggest you reread the last paragraph. Now, a lot of American media suggests this is just about money or fame or power for MTG and Bobert and their ilk. They are wrong. They are true believers. The most important adage about fascism is the simplest one. When they show who they are, when they tell you out loud, believe them. What is the next step in this pattern? Well, the GOP retakes the House and then the presidency. Trump rises again. This time, he elevates figures like Bobert and MTG to positions of real power. So far, they have only minor league power to change and alter conversations, to spread hate, and so forth. But what happens when figures like this have real power? Well, they tend to use it, again, in a very specific and predictable way. They usually drum up fake charges against the opponents, who they were only yesterday smearing. Quote, she's a member of the Jihad Squad. hardy har, unquote, because something much more dangerous and serious. Quote, she's a terrorist. Try her. Try everyone associated with her, and anyone who defends her too. It begins with scapegoating and smears. It ends in show trials, imprisonments for political opponents, and Jim Crow laws against the Jim Crow laws against minorities, and even that's only the beginning. Okay, I'm not going to now read the rest of it, but he's making the point. This is not a joke. It's not a feud. It is fascism. Nobody's checking them right now, but the pattern will continue. And if they get into power, say hi to Department of Homeland Security Secretary Boebert. Say hi to Education Secretary MTG. And so you get his point. So now I'm going to stop sharing that. And I want to ask you for the final part, okay, of our presentation today. What is to be done? What can we do to stop this, okay, from happening?
You're asking me, Joe?
I'm giving you the floor, Lisa.
Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say that this is a topic that I have been broaching this subject in certain circles for a while. I've talked to Joe about it before. But I've been talking about this for a while. And people weren't ready to talk about it. I think there's more of a palette now. People are seeing it. I definitely think that if you're familiar with the Donziger case, and I think most people that are probably watching your show are more familiar than most. And you realize when people start drawing the parallels and looking at how this all happened, there's an acceptance, right? People are more willing to look at this and go, you know what, we really need to take this seriously if they haven't already been thinking along those same lines. One of the things that Marianne Williamson said last night, and I think that panel was amazing, and I adore her, but she said, with the Donziger case, she started it out this way, and she said people just couldn't believe that was actually going to happen, that they were going to find him guilty and take him to jail. A lot of people didn't know about it because the mainstream media didn't pick it up, right? But then she also made this point, and it was really it struck me, and I think she's absolutely dead on. And what she said was that the younger generation looks at climate change, looks at what's going on with all of these issues, and it's their world that is going to end up in extinction. They already believe this. It's their world, it's their future that they have to contemplate. Whereas the older you are, the more comfortable you are, not looking at things from this is my future, right? You're more likely to just think, oh, it'll get fixed. It'll have to get fixed, right? You're more unable to put that on. And I'm not saying it anywhere near as articulate as she did, but if you go back and watch her clip, it becomes very clear that, I can see that. I can see talking to my parents per se. They put this off. They do. They want to change the subject. They don't want to get down into it too deep. And then once in a while, she'll mention something about it. But I think that what we are lucky with is that we've got an activist community, and we are very issue conscious, and we're not in denial about these things. The information is there. Now it is time to start standing up for doing what is right. And it really comes down to, are you willing to stand up to the powers that you encounter on a daily basis, be it at work or in your community, and stand up and do the right thing? Because it's hard. It really is. It's hard to be in that place where you are willing to know the difference between somebody infringing on someone's rights, or being in an environment at work where decisions are being made that just aren't the best decisions to be made for anyone in society. And if you're in a position of being able to call that out, even if you're going to lose your job, like Marianne Williams said, she said, if you're going to lose your job over it, then lose your job. That's not everybody's willing to do that. But what we're talking about here is very serious. And I know Teresa said I should smile once in a while, but this topic, I'm really not having it in me. I think it's the most serious topic that we all have to contend with, which is we have to start acting. We have to start organizing, coming together, demanding that our government, when our government is sending letters to the DOJ ignores them. When the UN issues a ruling saying that Stephen Donziger's prosecution is, violating his human rights, right? And it doesn't even make the national news. No one talks about it.
That's amazing. It doesn't make the national news, where the UN is accusing the U.S. of violating the human rights of one of its citizens. And it doesn't make the New York Times. It's not in the New York. What's going on here?
Right. It gets buried, right? And Marianne said that the American public have been desensitized, and they don't take the UN seriously, right? And one of the other things
she was quite right about that.
She is. Look, the Human Rights Declaration that Eleanor Roosevelt worked on, and with the UN and all of that, the United States never signed it. It's part of the reason why, as a first world quote unquote country, why we don't have a social safety net, why healthcare isn't considered a human right, why housing, we've got so many people that are homeless, they can't feed themselves. Health, you can't even be healthy here. It's not looked at as a right.
We have to emphasize here, healthcare is not considered a human right here.
Exactly. That's
but
what I
it
mean.
is considered a human right in those nations that
signed on. Yeah.
So all the nations of Europe, all our peers in the civilized world, except ourselves, have signed this declaration, and in their countries, healthcare is a human right, and every one of them have universal healthcare.
Right.
A form of universal healthcare.
Correct. So I think that, there is power in realizing that this is where we are, number one. There is hope in that when you have that knowledge and you have groups of people that are interconnected and already, fighting on these issues. I think that this realization could be a great unifier, because I know that we're already seeing and feeling behavior that we see out on social media, that we see in corporations, where people will go after you personally just to try and cancel you, try to turn opinion on you, and they will lie while they're doing it. That kind of thing, in an environment that we are in right now, where we have just laid out how fascism is definitely here, we just don't have the state figure that is going to implement it full on. But this climate has started long ago, whether intentional, accidental, or whatever. We are already looking at human life through a lens that devalues some, and others are, considered getting off scot-free on these things. Now we've got corporations who think that they can literally appoint their own prosecution from an entity that is prosecuting a lawyer that won a judgment against them in an international court, as well as in the sovereign where they committed these heinous crimes, killing people. And we can't even get our own Department of Justice to answer the letters of our representatives asking them questions on it. It's just like, it's all going away.
Right. And at the same time, we have the representatives of one of our parties inciting violence against the members of the other party, their colleagues in Congress, and calling it a joke.
Mm-hmm.
And then having some other members of their party respond in a much more serious way, calling for violence.
Right.
It's these things that tell us that we're on the verge of that we are in the middle of a transition to fascism. So the issue is, again, what is to be done if we transition to fascism? Can we do anything about the climate emergency then? It's very unlikely, because the fossil fuel companies are embedded within the fascist party. It's their party. It's the militarist party. Okay, it's the privatizers of healthcare party.
Mm-hmm. Both parties.
All in coalition in this particular party. And they're clearly moving towards setting up a one-party dictatorship in states across the country, a large number of states across the country.
Yeah.
They're going to use the one-party dictatorships in those states to overturn national elections and to create a one-party state at the national level. So what is to be done about this, in the near term? We don't have time to solve the climate emergency. We've got to get on top of it in the next 2 or 3 years. We don't have time to wait for fascism to pass. We have to stop it right now, or we won't be able to deal with the climate emergency. So what is to be done? I think you know what I'm going to say.
I know what you're going to say. I feel like you're fishing, and I don't have the right answer, Joe, because I'm not sure. I'm going to look at this from the ground up and from outside of, I'm looking at it from my perspective of what I'm doing, right?
Okay. And so from my perspective, what is to be done is plain. And that is dump the incumbents. And the reason why I say dump the incumbents is because that will be disruptive of Congress and disruptive of state legislatures all across the country. It will be disruptive of the structures that both the Republicans and Democrats have been setting up to shut out the voice of the people.
Mm-hmm.
It will give an opportunity for new people running for Congress who are not bought yet, who are not sold out, to have a chance to win. And finally, it will give some third party candidates, okay, a chance to win. But most of all, it will disrupt the plans of the Republicans to turn us into a one party state, because all of the Republican incumbents, one way or another, are going to be defeated, just like almost all of the Democratic incumbents are going to be defeated. We don't quite know who the creatures are who are going to replace them, but we know what we're heading towards now, and what other way do we have to stop it other than dump the incumbents? We have a year. We
Well,
have a year to stop it.
that is, I agree with you, and that is part of the solution. I agree with you, but I don't think that that's the only thing that we can do, Joe.
Oh, I agree with that.
Yeah,
I agree with that. I think dump the incumbents has to exist inside of the larger mass movement, take advantage of economic boycotts, the general strikes,
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of mass movement actions that dump the incumbents is a part of. So I certainly agree that is not the only thing.
Right. But in conjunction with that, right, I think that we are very much aware of the fact that a big part of this is the special interests, the corporations, and you know, all of this. We all know this. We've got strikes going on. There's more strikes coming up. I noticed here that Kellogg's, GoStar, uh, Kellogg's has announced that they will be hiring 1,600 scabs. And what has been said is that the Kellogg's workers are going to apply. They're just going to put applications in and apply for those jobs, so that it's gonna glut their system of being able to pick applicants, right? That's a beautiful thing. Getting people into the streets, out on, there's picket lines in most states, have some sort of strike going on in certain localities. We've said this before, but give them a little bit of your time. Even 15 minutes on a picket line. If you've got a couple hours, do a couple hours. And it is time to not only talk to labor about all the other issues that are going on that you believe in, right? That you think that people need to be aware of, especially in my case, I'm going to go for healthcare, right? But it also starts building those relationships with people outside of a political conflict, potentially, right? Which we've been entrenched in for 4 or 5, 6 years, really. If you get on a picket line, you don't ask somebody what their party affiliation is. You're just there to support them because they're striking for higher wages. It is a great unifier. And then you can actually approach people in a way that you're already supporting them. And we can start uniting around healthcare, around climate, around, all of this comes about for the corporations. And I keep tying this back to corporations and how they've got themselves the special interests of the government. And that's how this all started to go awry. If we focus on fighting for regulations, and I don't mean like having to rewrite regulations, because yes, we have altered regulations and it has deregulated certain parts of the market, and we all know that they did the FEC, or the Federal Communications Commission, where we ended up with 6 major media outlets that, we all know that most of us don't even like to watch them, right? But the SEC is not going after insider trading. They're not going after, it became okay to just disclose what trades you're making if you're in government now. That's all part of a climate that allows the corporations to take over. We speaking out on that, we pressuring Congress. And what I mean by that is what happened with that podcast yesterday, I truly believe had a lot to do with why Stephen Donziger is out of jail at the moment. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. They didn't want that hype. They didn't want that to start becoming a big deal in the media because it made them all look bad, all of them. The DOJ, the administration, the corporations, the infrastructure of the judicial system. It made it all look terrible, right? They don't want that stain.
Right, and they were sure to get further pressure from Congress.
Exactly.
Longer Donziger was in jail. It was an issue that was not going to go away.
It's that kind of thing that I think, we as each other, as activists, as concerned citizens, we just need to be talking to one another more. When you hear about actions that are calling out politicians, we need to pressure them. We need to get into the streets on that kind of stuff.
Yes.
We have to.
We must also say, or I must also say something else about dump the incumbents. Dump the incumbents in itself is neutral about who's going to replace the incumbents, except to say they can't be people who are taking money.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, as a movement, dump the incumbents it doesn't say what kind of people policy-wise ought to replace the incumbents. But the other movements being executed in parallel with the dump the incumbents movements will be stating preferences, will be telling people what issues are important.
Yes, that is key.
What candidates for Congress, where they stand on those very, very important issues. And so these other movements will be a supplement to dump the incumbents to guide the disrupted political system into a more creative and beneficial direction, guiding it, in the right way, so that it's not simply free to fall into a random pattern, which may not be a pattern that we want. Also, the Trumpists will be trying to guide the disrupted system in their way. So the point being, we not only have to be active in dumping the incumbents, we also have to be active in providing positive alternatives.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think I've said this here, Joe, but it is really important that we get out in front of this. What is it that you have to have your politician, your next president, your representatives support in order for you to vote for them? What are those things? Because there are very specific things that, even right now, Joe Biden could pick up an executive order and cancel student debt, all of it, unconditionally, right? We don't have to wait for the filibuster. We don't have to go through all of that rigmarole, mishigosh, dumb, Joe Manson, Christian Cinema, cut it in half, cut it down to nothing, means test it. He can pick up the pen and do it. That is huge. We could actually get out ahead of getting, massacred in 2020 if we could get these politicians to pressure him. Schumer just came out. I'm getting my days confused. It was either yesterday or the day before, tweeting about canceling student debt. And Warren came out and said that right now Joe Biden has the ability to cancel student debt. He holds the pen. Very different than talking about introducing a piece of legislation that's got to run through the House and the Senate. They are literally talking about executive order. That's huge. That is, think about, what is it, Joe? 45, 6?
It's 44.7 million people who have student loan debt.
Right? I mean, that is huge. And if we could alleviate that, that's $1.7 trillion into the hands of people who really need that money. It's a huge economic stimulus which doesn't have any contracts attached to it. It's going into the hands of households and of people who really need that money, who have been economically restrained, if not incredibly oppressed, because of that student debt that they're carrying around. Those types of things are huge. Don't let the Democratic Party or anybody else tell you what this election is about. We have that ability to get out in front of it and say, this is what I want. This is what I'm going to vote for you on, and put it out there. I mean, we're going to try to do that with a couple of things. We, the people that I associate with or don't associate with, we're going to try and do those exact things. But let's define those things. That we're not waiting for some huge bill to come out with all of these things that we all want, and then it gets cut into something that really isn't going to help enough people to even make a difference.
The percent of student loan debt that was owned by the government, okay, administered by the Department of Education, in April of 2020 was 92%. I think now it's gone up to 94%. In 2020, the total amount that was owed was $1.6 trillion. We know now that it's up to $1.8 trillion, which means it's quite likely that the percentage owned by the government has also gone up. I've been estimating it at 94%. I think I read that somewhere, but I'm not able to run that down easily. 94%, of course, is almost all of it that Biden can cancel with the stroke of a pen. But the remainder in student debt can be bought by the government from the private owners of the student debt.
Yeah, they can take the whole portfolio.
And then can be canceled.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they can do it all.
Yeah, they can do it all. The Federal Reserve, okay, the Federal Reserve can buy the 6% of outstanding student debt. Okay, and then the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve can collaborate in basically canceling the rest of it. It would take a few steps. But if the Treasury and the Federal Reserve wanted to do it, yes, they could.
They'd have to go through Congress, though, would they not?
I'm not even sure they'd have to go through Congress. In other words, if the Federal Reserve were to say it wants to buy up the student loans that are outstanding, that it could buy up the 6% left, okay, of student loans. But it can buy them up, but based on quantitative easing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, the quantitative easing.
Or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then if it itself were to own the student debt, okay, it could simply declare a moratorium, okay, on payments. The way things could work also is that each year the Federal Reserve transmits most of its profit, okay, to the Treasury Department. There might be an arrangement made such that those profits, okay, of the Federal Reserve would be redeemed to the Treasury in the form of student loan debt. In other words, in the form of the notes from the students. So the Treasury Department would end up as the owner of those loans. Then the Treasury Department, okay, would be in position to cancel those on the order of the president. So I think that's one thing that can be done. I haven't thought that through entirely carefully.
Does the Levy study touch on that?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I have to reread the
Yeah, I
Levy.
know. It's 84 pages of a lot of detail.
But yes, I was going to be ready to do that actually by Saturday because I was going to be presenting at that conference. But since we decided to go another way, I was able to say, "Oh, that can wait till next week or the week
Oh,
after."
no, I totally get it. I totally understand that. I was just curious because I think that they do. I think they do. Well, they address the whole portfolio in the study, so maybe they have a remedy there. Maybe they've actually called that out.
Yeah,
Which
it's
would be really good.
something we have to check out. I'm sure that in the relatively short run, well, the 94% could be instantly canceled, and then the other 6%, they could probably contrive to get a moratorium on that until they
That's
could be
interesting.
converted to federally owned loans. Because there's some process that's been converting all the private student loans into federally owned loans. So that
Mhm.
process is already on the books. So all that has to happen is for them to continue that process.
Well, we're talking about the private debt, right? We're talking about loans that weren't federally funded in the first place.
We're talking about, okay, to my mind, most of the student loans were actually let out by banks with the backing of the federal government to make sure there wouldn't be any losses to the banks. Okay, I don't think the federal government itself was letting out the student loans. Okay, I might be wrong about that, but I'm not.
Well, you did have to go to the bank. You did have to go to your bank, but I thought the banks were getting the funding from the government.
No, I think the banks were getting backing from the government.
So in other words, they could make the loans and they weren't going to go bad. But then
Uh,
why wouldn't they be on?
the federal government was guaranteeing those loans. Okay, it was a guarantee, but the banks were operating in their usual way, which is they create the money out of thin air when they make a loan.
So okay, so then let me ask you this. The So the banks themselves though don't service the loans.
Uh,
They don't.
there's some other middlemen, okay, that
Mhm.
process that are taking a rake off, okay, in order to service the loans and bother
So
the student creditors who haven't been paying off their loans. Okay, I don't think it's the banks themselves that are doing that.
no, it's not. So my question though is, are those banks do the loans sit as assets on the banks? Because I didn't get that impression.
So you don't have the impression that the student loans that are concluded by banks, that those loans are actually assets of those banks.
Correct.
I really can't comment on that because
Well, you know what? I'm going to have to find out that answer because
that's a very interesting question, though.
yeah, they're not. It's because banks will hold assets, but then they don't hold assets, and depending on how that is all put together, right? There's got to be a distribution for you to sign that promissory note, right?
Yeah.
But those funds, I went to PNC Banks or Penn, whatever it was, when I did mine. It's a loan, But that bank did not send the money to the school. The schools wait to be funded from those promissory notes. And that's where I'm going with this, Joe, is that I don't think that portfolio sits in the banks that I went to sign my promissory note at, is what I'm getting at. I think the banks work as an agent to get that promissory note signed. And then the transaction happens to the school through the federal student loan program, right? But there's not, I don't think they sit on local banks. Federal student
Yeah,
loan.
I don't know about the mechanics of that. I have
Yeah.
studied the mechanics of that very carefully. In fact, I've hardly studied the mechanics of that at all. Okay, so
Now, see, Lana's saying they get sold to a second market like the other loans. Yep, that makes a lot of sense, Lana. I'm just
that
curious
makes
if
sense
the
to me
debit
too.
is credit.
Yeah, the banks turn around and sell them into the secondary market, right?
I don't know, because wouldn't that make them private then? I mean, who goes and buys
No, they would still
securities
be
of
backed
student
by
loans?
the government guarantee.
But is there a second market for student loans? And third and fourth? I mean, who buys student loans right
Yeah,
now? Because if that were the case, Joe, it would
yeah,
be a
maybe
problem to
they're,
put a moratorium on payments,
yeah.
right?
Uh,
Anyhow,
as I said, at this point, most probably 94% of student loans, okay, are owned by the government.
yep, somewhere.
Right, and there may even be a rule somewhere in the Education Act that uh, it's possible, at the option of the government, that since the government is guaranteeing the loan, that it has the right to buy the loan, okay, if it wants to. There could be something like that in the rules. I don't know. That's really speculation, though. Okay, so Teresa Sanders says yes. Doc Donziger was on with Marianne Williamson. It was great, talking about rule of law, indigenous people, corporate power, and prisons. Everybody is really glad. And Teresa Sanders also says Donziger also put a challenge out to law students. Yes, I saw that. To do clinics for legal aid at the
Oh,
local
yeah.
prisons. And he talked about the terrible food and the minuscule portions. I didn't see that part of it, but I did see him call out to Yale law and to Quinnipiac law to do clinics, okay, and give aid to the prisoners, specifically at Danbury Prison, because that's where he was. And Danbury, I think, is in Connecticut, right?
Yes, I think
That's
so.
why, he was calling to those law schools. So that was interesting. Uh, Teresa says, but Joe, it looks like our government is planning for that. Yes, the surveillance, the paramilitarization, the breakdown of the rule of law, of course, the capture of the mainstream media as well. Yeah, I agree, Teresa. That is the direction in which we're heading. Just says, I don't understand why people like Chris Hedges, Tom Hartman, Rick Wolf, and many others who have public platforms and contacts in various concerned groups on a variety of issues. I'm not sure I understand that uh, sentence, Teresa. It doesn't seem to be. It seems to be an uncompleted sentence. And Kay says Ohio is already moving on getting rid of Roe v. Wade. Yeah, I'm sure they are, because fundamentalists are very strong there, aren't they? I'm sorry. So Teresa says, I don't understand why they don't network to form coordinated strikes and protests across the country. I see. Stats show it takes 3.5% of the population, around 12 million here, to successfully change their government. That's what statistics show, but I'm not sure that's sufficient to change our government. Our government is very strong in certain ways. When it gets a chance to call out the troops, I'm not sure 12 million people in the streets across the country would do it. Yeah, I know Tom Hartman always quotes the 3% figure.
Well, yeah, but he's talking about a paradigm shift, right? But that's not a stagnant 3.5. That's got to continue to grow. The idea,
As as was said, it's a statistical figure. It may not apply to the United States, for a variety of reasons. Teresa says peacefully protesting in a repetitive guerrilla style like the French, rather than violence or campouts, have greater success. Yes, I agree, Teresa. Those are the kinds of techniques.
I love the manure spreader that they blanketed the palace with.
Yeah,
That is a beautiful thing.
and Lana asks, but what is a command economy again? Okay, it's economy where the elites come together and decide on what the targets, are going to be, and decide who's going to do what, and who's going to get what profits, and then they basically run the show. Okay, that way.
I still think we've got that already, Joe.
No, I don't think we have it quite. In other words, we don't have the goals, we don't have the targets, we don't have.
We don't know of them. They don't talk about it.
Yeah, but I don't think they're efficient enough, frankly, to do a planned economy yet. In other words, the individual companies and factories and elites, that are running them, have their own ideas about what the goals and objectives should be for their companies. And I don't think there's an aggregation process that is run by the government, which would allow them to negotiate, and to bargain, and who decides on who gets this particular share of the pie and who gets that particular share of the pie, and so on. In the fascist states, that kind of thing was going on, and the government had a big role. It was very active, and it could knock heads together, in order to decide on what the goals of the economy would be.
I see. Okay.
So Teresa says we
Yeah.
need central organizing for simultaneous national protests. Yeah. Just going to Washington isn't going to get it. Not enough people can go there in the numbers we need. We need some coordinating vehicle. Yeah, I quite agree, Teresa.
Dr. Barber has he's got rolling marches, and he seems to be concentrating on areas of the U.S. to do it. There's one on the 13th. That's the Monday. That's this coming Monday. Scott Disnoris is speaking at it. And he is calling it a moral imperative. And he is, the Poor People's Campaign goes through the litany of issues that are important on deck, and they are all the issues that tie in with everything else. That their health care, and it just keeps going. Everything. And from what I can tell, they are going to continue to do this throughout the summer. But they are organizing buses where they will fund. If you want to go, you sign up. And if there's still capacity, they will drag you down to DC. So just so you know, go hit up Poor People's Campaign. And right now they have buses. I think there's buses out of Ohio. There isn't any in Southwest PA, but there's some in on the east side of PA and all down the coast right now. Not so far down, but there's a swath of states heading to DC Monday.
So just 4 days from now.
Yeah, but there's also the Ohio. He was speaking in Ohio, and I guess the date for Ohio is going to be the 18th of June. So this is, he said they've got this planned out.
Yep, that's good. So Teresa also says, I saw a gray zone report that a sanction against Nazism, fascism. So many, I think the keyboard went a little clear. I'm not sure what she's saying here. Think they were socialists. Comes up yearly at the UN, and only 2 countries vote against the sanction.
Oh yes,
And one is consistently the United States.
right.
In so many ways, folks, we are a rogue nation. And the only reason why we are not sanctioned is because we're so powerful.
Because we're the superpower.
If we were a small nation that were acting in the same way, we would be sanctioned by the other nations of the world, because we are a rogue nation.
Oh, such a stark and somber reality, right?
Yes. Yeah, a lot of good comments here. I won't have time to read them all. Teresa's coming up with a string of good ones. She asks, why don't we coup the Saudis? We have everyone else over there with oil. Well, the Saudis are the protectors of the holy sites of Islam in Arabia. And we are probably afraid that if we try to coup the Saudis, that we would have a religious war on our hands. They're allied with the Wahhabist fundamentalists, okay, in Islam. And that kind of protects them, I think. Okay, protects the family. I don't know. It's really a weird situation over there. That state is a weird, weird state because it is feudal in character, basically.
Well, we also, the governments function, they are very interdependent upon one another.
Yes.
Ours
The
and theirs.
Wahhabists and the Saudis, the royal family, are very interdependent. Yes.
Oh, yes, but I was talking about the relationship traditionally between, I mean, we can rattle our sabers all we want, but I mean, it's very clear that we do a lot of business with the Saudis. We need them. Okay, period.
Well, we need them as long as we don't want to, conserve oil. What I'm saying is, if we rationed oil while we made the transition, to alternative fuels, we might have enough oil on our own that we would not need anything from the Saudis.
We wouldn't need any oil from the Saudis, is what you mean.
That's what I mean. Yeah, we wouldn't need any oil from the Saudis, right?
We still need a relationship with the Saudis, and here's where I keep coming with this, Joe. We're not above board. We don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't know what's really going on. That's why I'm just, I look at the structures that we refer to from historic fascist states. And what keeps coming into my head about it is that the governments they don't function the way that they used to, with all the technology and all of the superpowers and the interdependence we are on each other from flow of goods and all of that, right? It's very different than it was, back in the 20th century. It's just not, the governments aren't the same. The interdependence isn't the same.
Yeah, it's different
as it was then. It's very different.
Yeah.
So I just keep scratching my head on a lot of it. And there's so much offshore money. Government, and we're not just talking about wealthy individuals, we're talking about corporations, and they function that way, you know?
Yeah.
So I just keep scratching my head as to will it really come about the same way? It feels like it's much more steeped here than it might have been back then.
Yeah, back in the 70s, right.
Mm.
I think it is. I think the interdependencies among different parts of the neoliberal elites are much deeper
Mm-hmm.
than they were
Mm-hmm.
in 70s.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I keep going back to this. Centrism gets you in this very slippery place,
Yes,
right?
I
The
agree.
Overton window is so shifted to the right.
Yep, they've done that over 40, 45-year time.
Mm-hmm.
So Lana asked Joe, these are the judges I asked you about the other day, if they could be ousted. Uh, I think they could be ousted, okay, in a number of ways. First, they could be investigated by the Department of Justice.
Oh, that would be a beautiful thing, wouldn't it?
And
Oh,
results of the investigation, or simple fear of the results of the investigation, might actually force these judges to resign. Okay, but on top of that, there's another way in which the judges can absolutely be ousted, and that is if the Department of Justice takes over the prosecution, as Sheldon Donziger, okay, is asking, then they would no longer be the judges. There would be federal judges who would be appointed. Uh, I guess they wouldn't be appointed by the prosecutors at the Department of Justice, but they would be federal judges from the Southern District, okay, of New York, who most likely would be hearing the case.
the contempt case, you mean?
Not so much the contempt case, okay, because, but there were other issues, like there was the issue of fraud. Okay, in other words, Donziger was originally supposed to be prosecuted for fraud,
Mm-hmm.
but
But then that fell apart, didn't it?
that fell apart. And the
Mm-hmm.
Department of Justice said there was nothing there, so they
Right.
weren't going to prosecute him for fraud. So then it was turned over, to a private prosecutor. And the private prosecutor asked for the computers.
Right.
And
Right. That's
the
how that
prejudiced
happened.
judges, the prejudiced judges have validated that request, from the private prosecutors. And Donziger said, no, it's, attorney-client privilege. I can't turn these over to you. And that's how he got into the criminal contempt type, okay, situation. So to get him out of the criminal contempt type uh, of case, I think there what could happen is a pardon from Joe Biden. Okay, and then that would relieve that situation. Okay, but as far as the fraud case is concerned, okay, I think Donziger is asking uh, for the Department of Justice to take on the fraud case,
I see.
okay, and
Intervene
to
in
make
that.
an official decision about it.
Mm-hmm.
So the issue would not come up again. They wouldn't be able then to appoint, a private prosecutor if he were basically cleared by the Department of Justice in that instance. So I think that's why he's asking for that.
That makes sense.
Unfortunately, I'm not nearly as good a lawyer as Sheldon Donziger is, so I'm not quite sure, all the legal aspects of the case. There are many other good comments that are being named. That,
Yeah, there was a lot of really good engagement here.
yeah, there was very good engagement. Well, there was a very funny one by Teresa. Nobody wants to live in a work a cubicle here or a pod in space. Hashtag Jeff Bezos' big vision for mankind. But
Oh
some
God.
will get to visit Earth. Sound like Soylent Green much? Yes.
Oh man.
Yeah, Soylent Green is one of our very favorite, all-time favorite movies, Bonnie's and mine.
I haven't watched that in decades.
It's been a long time since we watch it, but we content ourselves
We have the tape.
with playing Beethoven's Sixth Symphony.
Love it. I love it. I love it.
Ghostot says that was an exceptional show. I switch over there when at Joseph Firestone had technical difficulties. Oh yeah, you mean the other day when we were, trying to do the Dump the Incumbents show. Uh, I have to insist, Ghost Start, on that occasion that I did not have any technical difficulties on that day. Technical difficulties were in other quarters, but there were technical difficulties. Evelina says Facebook not giving me likes. Kay says I'll volunteer for Soylent Green just to get out of it. I have little faith. Kay, have faith in Dump the Incumbents. She says she has followed Professor Wolf for many years. And then Teresa says, did you see a Christmas card with 3 to 4 sons in front of a Christmas tree holding assault rifles? Hashtag beware the Christian Taliban. Hashtag separate church and state. Were you talking about Susan Sarandon's Christmas card with our sons holding assault rifles? Was there such a thing?
I saw that picture. I thought it was. I thought it was related to either Bobart or MTG, but I didn't. I glanced at it, and my memory's not the best because I was running through a lot of data. Somebody knows.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody does know. Holly says, jihad means struggle to do right and to be close to Allah. Not at all what Westerners say. Yeah, I know.
It's awful.
Yeah, most Westerners are so ignorant of the Quran. I include myself as being pretty ignorant, okay, about the Quran and what it says. And Teresa says, our abusive government has
Some
created
rep in
a
Kentucky.
feral society. Say that again.
Lana is saying it was some rep in Kentucky that did the Christmas card with the family holding the rifles or assault weapons.
Okay, thank you.
Christmas tree.
Sandy says the teenagers in some towns around the area, this is in New Jersey, let the teens run wild, and they're disruptive, destructive, and verbally abusive. But the police can't do anything about it. And Holly says Sandy can't or won't or both. Sandy says can't. They can't arrest them. They can only bring them home. Evelina says, how does all this stand beside Biden's upcoming summit of democracies? Would you like to bet that at that summit of democracies, quite a few nations will be there that are not democracies? But I know at least one nation that will be there that is not a democracy. That's us. Kellogg has announced that it will break the strike by hiring 1,600 scabs. And Teresa says, if we're going to dump but the Republican opponents in red states like mine will only have other Republicans as viable candidates. So I thought voting for their challenger was part, and they will be taking corporate dollars, right? So, according to the dump the incumbents, some of the subsidiary rules say that you vote for the candidate with the least amount, okay, of corporate dollars. Okay, or of course, if you have a situation where you have a Republican candidate who's running with corporate dollars, then you have to vote against that particular candidate and select a candidate who is not running, okay, with corporate dollars. Okay, so we don't just have the overall rule of dump the incumbents, but we have a few subsidiary rules to handle the kinds of situations that you're mentioning here. Does Dr. Joe think the president might be more preoccupied with foreign matters rather than problems at home? Because it sure looks like it. Yeah, but he hasn't really been spending that much time on foreign matters either, it seems. It seems to me he's been dividing his time between the various problems and not really getting viable solutions for anything. Can you clarify on dumping Republican incumbents? I'm prepared to change party as there is no viable Dem or third party candidates. So their challenger will be another rep on corporate dollars. Okay. There may not be a viable Dem or third party candidate, but you have to change your opinion about what is viable, because if you're part of the movement and you're going to vote to dump the incumbents, then you have to consider that if the movement is large enough, which you will know about before voting day, and you have to consider that if the movement is large and strong, that there would be that either Dem or third party candidates might well be viable in that kind of environment, where you would be dumping both the Republican incumbents and also any Republican challengers who were taking corporate money. So you have to envision the change in climate that would come about as a result of growth in the movement, and not try to abstract the situation and assume that everything is going to be the same as it is now, except for the advice to dump the incumbents, because we're predicating the dump the incumbent campaign on further progress in the progressive movement, further activism, entirely new actions being taken from now until the election of 2022, and dump the incumbents riding that wave. So that's important. Kay says Biden is not even passing voting rights bills. Yeah, Evelyn says 94%. Wow, yeah, no, he's not even passing voting rights bills because they haven't been able to get both Manchin and Sinema to go along.
Have they even talked about taking up Build Back Better in the Senate yet?
They are taking it up.
When?
In the Senate, but I don't believe, if you're asking, is there a floor vote scheduled for it yet?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
I think the answer to that question is there isn't a floor vote scheduled yet.
God in heaven.
Okay. They are still negotiating. They're sort of insisting that they may be close to getting agreement on all of the relevant matters, but we don't really know that. And Lana says, first, we have to see who, if anyone, is standing up to challenge your Republican opponents in the primary. If not, I guess you vote for the D or the independent, okay, in the general election as you see fit. As long as the D is not a corporate D, okay, Okay, I guess you would still vote for the D, even if the D is a corporate D in that instance, because it's worthwhile to throw the incumbents out and disrupt the power structure. I have to think on that a little more. We'll be thinking as the weeks go by, and by the time we're through, we'll be able to answer any question like that. So
It's not simple. There's
yes,
a lot to think
simple.
about.
It's not simple because there are situations that have come up, that are not anticipated. But the point is, the movement will be successful if you can cover, let's say, 97% of the cases. Then it will be overwhelmingly successful. Only if you default. Yes, Joe, just like the FHA or VA mortgages. I think Lana is.
She's talking about the loans, yeah.
Yeah, she's talking about the loans and how the federal government participates in the loans. That I had said that they were guaranteed, that the federal government was guaranteeing the loans. And I think that's what Lana's validating. She says some do service, but if you default, she's saying some banks do service. But if you default, they often get shipped off to the collectors. Yeah, I would expect that too. Lana says student loans get sold in the secondary market just like other loans. Lana says they don't have to, depends on. So if they're being sold in the secondary market, the Federal Reserve could certainly go into the secondary market and buy up the loans. Lana says they don't have to, depends on if they need the cash now or prefer to keep making the payments every month. Yeah. Okay. And Lana says, okay, command economy sounds like Davos and APAC. No, it's more like the old Soviet Union was and the way Nazi Germany was. And the way that Italy was too, to some degree. And Lana says, bless you, Bonnie. That was at 11:22. I'm not sure what she was blessing you for. And Lana says, how can there be a private prosecutor, and especially one with ties to the oil company? Seems nuts. Yeah, it was nuts to me. It's nuts to everybody who looks at this case, and who knows anything about the details. It's thoroughly corrupt. They used a loophole in the rules to corrupt the system of justice in this case. Lana says, I think Teresa signed out. Sorry she missed you reading that. Laugh out loud. Lana says, no, some rep from Kentucky. Kay says, that was Bobbert with the Christmas guns. And Lana says, Kay, she was the second one. The first one is from Kentucky. Kay says, I know Lana. And Lana says, people might have to re-register in closer primary state to dump the incumbents. We need to make sure the challengers from all sides are on our lists. We do. Ali asks if we knew there was an organization called the Brand New Congress. Yes, I have known about Brand New Congress for years and have interviewed some of the people they endorsed, in previous years as well. I think generally speaking, they do a better job of endorsement and also have better Congress people as compared with the Justice Democrats, for example. Hang on just 1 second, folks.
Brand New Congress is an organization.
Hi, Shane. I'm still online.
Not to confuse dumping incumbents.
Call you back later. Okay, that just happened to be Shane calling me. So Brand New Congress is an organization that promotes the progressive Democrats, not to confuse dump the incumbents. Yes, Holly, we know the Democrats are progressive coming out of Brand New Congress. That is for sure. Folks, I think we've reached the end. Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. I'll be back on Saturday. I think that Lisa is going to be a bit late because she has an engagement at 8:30 or so. But I'm
I have an engagement from 8:30. I don't know how long it's going to go. I did text and I didn't get an answer, but I don't think we're going to go forever. I would think I'd be done in an hour.
right, and so she's very likely to be joining us about maybe 9:30, 9:45 or something like that. So she will be here for a very good part of the show, and I will handle the rest of it.
And everybody, please, we're doing the crafting circle tomorrow, and you can still sign up. I will tweet that out, and I'll pin it. Actually, I don't know if I can pin it. I'll go find an account that has it.
Right. Okay. So if she tweets it out, then she'll be at 50 lines only. Okay, on Twitter. Okay, in case you don't know.
Yeah, I just have to go find it.
It's 50 lines only. Which is
actually go to Red Berets Pen at Red Berets PENN, and I have it. I think I've got it pinned there. I'm just going to confirm that right now.
Okay.
And the answer is hurry, come up, come on.
Okay, and if you come tomorrow,
there.
But if you come tomorrow, we will be there.
Yeah, we're going to go for 3 hours, but you certainly don't have to stay all that time. You can drop in anytime between 7 and 10, but you do have to register ahead of time. So please
right.
do.
So that's the story. I have registered. I'm going to get a link.
Yeah, you'll get it in your email.
All right. It's a Zoom call, folks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it was a great discussion, even though it was a heavy and one that keeps you awake. But thank you, Joe, because I'm glad that we did this.
So am I. I'm really happy that we did it.
I am too. Good night, everybody.
And I think we did a hell of a good job with it, too. So, everybody, thank you very much for coming. And we'll see you in a couple of days.
Bye, folks. Bye, Joe. Bye, Bonnie.
So, good night and bye, Lisa.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Lana. Bye, Holly. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Oh, I'm in Pittsburgh. Okay. She's in Canton. I'm in Pittsburgh. She wanted to know. Or outside of, but close enough.
Right.
I'm leaving.
So, good night again. I'm going to end the broadcast. Oops, there it is.